Hi, everybody, and thank you for joining us. I am Sarah Ressing, the Education and Program Coordinator at Wild Ones. We're thrilled to have you with us for today's program, The Beauty and Benefits of Hedgerows with Heather McCargo of the Wild Seed Project. Before I turn it over to our speaker, a few notes. This webinar is hosted on YouTube Live, so feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. If you'd like to hide the chat, enter full screen mode. Closed captioning is available in your settings, and you can pause or rewind using the controls at the bottom of the player. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the Wild Ones channel for more great content. For those of you who are new to Wild Ones, we are a membership organization devoted to promoting native plants and natural landscapes through education, advocacy, and collaborative action. We carry out our mission through the national educational programs, such as Wild Ones Journal, Native Garden Designs, Seeds for Education grants, and webinars like this one. If you're not a Wild Ones member, we hope you will join us in helping native plants and natural landscapes thrive in every community. At the local level, Wild Ones chapters offer a knowledgeable, hands-on, and supportive community. Chapter programs include garden tours, speakers, conferences, as well as plant sales, exchanges, and seed collections. Local chapters are a great place to network with nature enthusiasts and learn more about native plants. We're an inclusive community. Diverse voices and backgrounds make us stronger, and that's why we welcome everyone to join us. Connect with your local Wild Ones chapter and begin making an environmental impact, contribute to education, and build a network focused on the preservation, restoration, and establishment of native plant communities. If there's not a chapter near you, please think about starting a Wild Ones seedling. Start the conversation with Wild Ones, and we can help you grow a chapter in your area. Our chapter liaisons are in the chat if you have questions, or you can fill out your information on our website. And finally, programs like tonight's webinar would not be possible without generous support from all of you. So please consider donating to Wild Ones today. Dwindling biodiversity is a threat to the foundation of life on Earth. In the last century alone, we've lost millions of acres of diverse ecosystems to urbanization. Native plants help protect and restore biodiversity, improve air and water quality, and provide wildlife with food and shelter. Wild Ones' vision is native plants and natural landscapes in every community, and your donation will help us reach that goal. Beyond donations, there are so many ways to contribute to the Wild Ones mission. You can volunteer at the local or national level, certify your habitat, explore a range of branded items on our website, or dive into our recommended reading list. Every action helps make a difference in creating a healthy planet. Visit wildones.org to learn more and get involved. And now I'd like to welcome our speaker. Heather McCargo founded Wild Seed Project in 2014. She served as its executive director until 2021. She now focuses on expanding the organization's native seed collection and propagation center. With over 40 years of experience in plant propagation, landscape design, horticulture, and conservation, Heather has been an educator, plant propagator, and a contributor to ecological research. She's lectured nationally and is widely published in various journals and magazines. Thank you so much for being here, Heather.
Well, thank you. I'm thrilled to be here today. I've known about Wild Ones for a long time, and it's great to have a chance to present on one of my favorite topics about native hedgerows. So what I'm going to cover today is what's different about a hedgerow of native plants than the typical landscape hedges we're all familiar with. I'm going to show you where a lot of ideas of where you can do this and give you some design examples. I'm going to talk about site preparation before planting a hedgerow. And I'm also going to point you to the extensive resources we've created at Wild Seed Project to help you make the best choices for planting native plants, and in this case, on hedgerows. Before we begin, I want to remind everyone that our beautiful land belonged to another people when the colonists arrived 500 years ago. And at Wild Seed Project, we've been working on a land acknowledgement statement in respect to the indigenous people that are still here. And I'm just going to read you a short piece of it. If you want to see more of it, you can go to our website. Wild Seed Project is located within the ancestral Wabanaki territory we now call Maine. We recognize and honor the tribes of the Wabanaki, the people of the Dawn, the Abenaki, Maliseet, Micmac, Penobscot, and Passamaquoddy. The Wabanaki people have been stewards of this land and the plants growing here for generations, and we recognize their inherent sovereignty and support their continued efforts to protect the land, water, plants, and creatures. Now, what is a hedgerow? A hedgerow is really a diverse planting of native species of woody plants, from shrubs to trees, along with an herbaceous ground cover. And this creates a corridor of vertical, above ground, and below ground habitat that supports the life cycles of plants and animals, which are so critical to all the natural processes that we need for our region's ecosystem to function. All of our native habitats have been chopped into isolated islands, and linking these habitats together across particularly our human dominated landscape, which is almost everywhere now, especially in the eastern half of the country. It's critical to help the wild plants and animals have healthy populations that maintain their genetic diversity. And it also gives them the ability to migrate across the landscape. And this has always been important, but it's even more important now with our rapidly changing climate and with all the obstacles the modern world has created to plant and animal migrations. And we gardeners need to move beyond the single species hedges. Most of the hedges you encounter are, usually Eurasian species, might be privet or lilac or barberry. Some of those are invasive. They're often sheared to control their size, because if you've ever seen even a privet grows into, a charming small tree. So to keep it as a hedge, they're usually sheared. And then there's no understory. At the most, there might be a little mulch. And there, of course, are many native species that would make a beautiful single species hedge. But the point is to get more diversity into our landscapes, get beyond just this one species. So with a native hedgerow, you're talking layers of vegetation, multiples of each species, a diversity of species, and the bigger space you have, the more that you can plant. And then, of course, planting the herbaceous layer on the ground, and creating an environment where the leaf litter can collect and degrade over the winter. And it's really this mixture of many different species that's critical, because monocultures don't exist in nature. And it's our simplification of the landscape that has really led to so many ecological problems. It's diversity that creates resilience. And one of the really important ways to instantly get diversity in your landscape is to stop using chemicals, both the chemical fertilizers and, of course, pesticides, which are designed to kill, but even fertilizers. And this is even a problem in the native nursery trade. A lot of nurseries are still using Osmocote. Those are those little pelleted balls of, what's considered a slow release fertilizer. And when it first came out, 30 something years ago, it was marketed, it will slow release the chemical fertilizer, so you won't have runoff, but it's still, a chemical fertilizer, and that kills the life in the soil. On top of it, those little balls are made out of plastic, and they end up in the soil. So immediately go organic. Then you will have a live soil filled with all kind of microorganisms, bacteria, fungi, and little creatures, and you'll just instantly add a lot of diversity to your landscape just with that quick shift. Now, I want you to think about how nutrients are recycled in nature. And the nutrient needs of our native wild plants are different than our vegetables and common domesticated plants like annual flowers, in that they don't need the high levels of compost and nitrogen that people think even a good organic vegetable garden knows they have to add a lot of compost and manure to have healthy plants grow, but that's just not true of our native plants. And so if you look to a forest to model what's going on, what happens every year, this time of year, is a huge amount of leaves start dropping down to the forest floor and carpeting the ground. And, and all the those leaves add a lot of nutrients back to the soil. Then also twigs, branches, rotting logs fall down on the ground in the forest too. All the little animals that are up in the trees, birds, small mammals, amphibians, they are also defecating, and that nutrient falls down to the forest floor. Small mammals don't tend to be eaten by larger birds of prey and stuff. They tend to degrade right under the leaf litter. And then all of that yearly drop down of nutrients both cushions the soil from heavy rain. It acts like an insulating blanket to the extremes of temperature over the winter. Lots of different animals, birds will forage in the floor. Lots of species of butterflies and moths and other insects are insulated and overwinter in the leaf litter. And it acts as a sponge to capture and store rainwater. And this is all the nutrients, that our native plants need. That will supply it once you've built up healthy soil. So how do you do this in a more cared for garden? The first thing you do is leave the leaves. And this is something that all of us should be turning our attention to right now, is let the leaves land where they fall. Now, they land on your lawn. Hopefully you're working to shrink your lawn, but you can rake them off the lawn into your beds. Of course, you can rake them off your patio and pathway and driveway, and again, put them on the bed. But this is a critical resource that really creates healthy soil that our native plants like. And a couple years of you doing that, you will see your garden soil transform. The other thing you want to do is keep all your prunings on site. Now, you don't have to prune your trees and shrubs. They do that naturally. That's really an aesthetic thing that we do. But if you want to tidy up your landscape a little bit more than happens in nature, you can make brush piles. This person did it on the back of their property border, kind of made a hedgerow out of brush. You can also find creative, decorative ways to do this in your landscape. The point is nothing, no leaves, no branches should be leaving your site. I live in the city. I live in Portland, Maine, and I do all of these things. Some branches I leave where they fall. Others I chop to little pieces and use as mulch around different plants. And then I have areas where I make little brush piles. Sometimes they're hidden behind something. There are creative ways, but you should not be sending any of the organic matter from your yard off, even in a nice brown paper bag, to the recycling center, in your town. You should be recycling it on your property. These are valuable nutrients. Now, we have so many great species of native plants that make beautiful hedgerow plants. And here, I'll just show you a couple small ones here. This is New Jersey tea on the upper left, sweet fern on the right. The lower right is Fothergilla gardeniae, the small Fothergilla, and the lower left is steeplebush spirea. I could spend all hours going through showing you all the great different native plants you can use in a hedgerow, but I'm not going to do that. The reason I'm not going to do that is because this is one of the things that we've done at Wild Seed Project. We've created a huge amount of resources. We have a great, beautiful website with a lot of free information and all kind of species lists for different growing conditions. And then we've also created these print publications. And these three here, the native trees, native shrubs, and native ground covers, give you a lot of information that will help you choose the species for your hedgerow. Our new publication this year is called Planting for Climate Resilience, and it has, along with more species organized by habitat, it also has some great articles. We invited some Indigenous people to contribute to it. But I'm just going to show you some examples of what's in our guides to help you realize why the information you need to design your hedgerow is in them. So this is from the tree guide, and here's two smaller native trees, witch hazel and serviceberry. So we tell you where the plant grows in the wild, how it does in the garden landscape situation, because some plants might, only be found in the woodland understory, but they're tolerant to quite a bit of sun, or they might be a wetland plant, but can handle a dry site. We show you their growth form. We also tell you when they flower, when the seeds ripen, and also what wildlife they support. So here's some sample pages from our shrub guides. One of the things that's really important to know when you're planting shrubs is their growth habit. So for instance, the high bush blueberry on the right, a mature high bush blueberry, all the stems come out from the base close together, and then it arches out and can be a wide shrub, easily 6 or 8 feet wide. So that's a great thing to know when you're designing what can you plant underneath it. Another great native shrub, purple flowering raspberry, is a sucker, which means over time it makes a large colony. So you need to know that when you're planting it in your landscape. It's not going to stay as one small plant. It will migrate, so you want to know that. And then in our ground cover guides, same thing. We talk about whether they reproduce just from seed or also vegetatively, if they stay as a clump, or if they, creep along the ground. That's all the kind of information, again, telling you which ones are keystone species. All that information is in these guides. And so they're a really valuable tool. And then they also have lists in them. So these are the ones that grow well in the shade. These are the ones that grow well in a wet spot. These are ones that grow well in a dry, sunny spot or a partly shady spot. All that information is in our guides. And, we did that because we find people, you can't tell that when you go to a nursery and just buy the plant. People needed more information. I've also written on native hedges and hedgerows several times. And these 2 articles are free to get. One's for the Ecological Landscaping Alliance on native hedges and hedgerows. And the other one I did more for bigger, like organic farms and other properties. So the native hedgerow, they also include species lists. So you can look up your site conditions and then choose the plants that will work with this. So my point is that we've created at Wild Seed Project all this information. It's out there for you to access to do a better job. So now I'm going to move on to where can you add hedgerows in a typical sort of suburban, urban, or landscape. And the first place is looking around your house. And this is a house in a small seaside village in Maine. And on their front side of the house, they just have maybe 15 feet to the edge of the street. And the whole 15 feet has been planted with layers of trees, understory trees, shrubs, and ground covers. There's a pathway, between sort of the house and the front hedgerow, but get beyond only thinking of it as, a thin corridor. There are opportunities all around your house. And I'm going to show you a couple other areas where you can do this. In this picture, you're seeing there's a big mature river birch on the upper right. There's pagoda dogwood. There's thuya. That's the native hydrangea, and then lots of native herbaceous species. There's also a lot of bayberry in here. So one really nice way to create a hedgerow that's diverse and also neat and tidy and more traditional looking is to do it in a linear fashion. And there's a couple of places you could do this. You could do this, on the front of your house along the street. Maybe you'd have a trellis in the middle with a gateway. And then on the borders of your property, you could bump up, so not just having a combination of low species in the front, but when you get to the edge bumping up, you can also do this between your yard and your neighbor. Let's say you're friendly with one of your neighbors, so you can do on your side or back border, you might do this. It's also a handy thing to do if you have a bigger yard or even any size yard. You can make this hedgerow about, maybe 10 feet in from your property line. And then you've created a utility area where you can have your composting and brush piles and recycling and maybe a garden shed or store bicycles. But if it's let's say this is a sunny, dry site, you might on either end where you've bumped up, you might have a red bud or beach plum as the bigger small tree shrubs on the border. And then you could have a mixture lower planting. It could be beach rose or not beach rose, I'm sorry. Virginia rose and bayberry are really nice together. And those two shrubs you can cut back lower every couple of years if you want to keep them under 3 feet. You could also do chokeberry mixed with the native spirea. If it's a shady site on the edge, you could have witch hazel on one side and a cluster of pagoda dogwood on the other side, and then the shrub mixed layer could be clethra and maple leaf viburnum. And then, of course, you're going to want to have the herbaceous layer. And so with a ground cover, I like to get people thinking of combining at least 2 or 3 species that all like the same growing conditions. And so you might have whitewood aster combined with one of the anemones. And on the Wild Seed Project website, I have a nice blog on native ground covers along with our ground cover guide that gives you a whole bunch of different combinations. But that you've now got multiple species instead of just one species of hedge, and you've created a nice edge either to the street or to your neighbor or to screening your utility area. Here's an example of the Virginia rose mixed with the white spirea. And that's along a farm fence just with a deer fence behind it. Here's another way you might use a fence along the street. This is just a 3-foot high picket fence. And this is one of Wild Seed Project's premier seed volunteers, and she has a more dense planting of native trees, shrubs, and herbaceous species on the house side of the fence, but on the street side, she has a couple different herbaceous species. This picture is taken in late September, early October, so you're seeing the New England aster, but she had lots of other things blooming before it, which are now underneath the aster and you don't see anymore. So that's a really nice way to buffer your yard from the street and add a lot of biodiversity. Another place you can do this is on your little paved terrace or patio off the side of your house. And again, not just having one long hedge, but you can have, multiples of, say, a lower hedge. So let's pretend this is a shade, partly shady space. You could have Fothergilla and Spirea tomentosa, steeplebush spirea really look adorable together, where there's a little bit of sun, and then in the corner, let's say it's a shady corner, that might be a witch hazel. in one corner and a dogwood the other one, and then mixed in some other more medium-sized shrubs and trees, and then of course the ground cover underneath. And again, whitewood aster, sedum ternatum, the little native sedum, New York fern mixes well with those. A mixture of herbaceous layer will give you a lot of diversity in that small planting just off your patio, where someone more traditionally might have just done a privet hedge. Now, one area that I'm really passionate about creating more buffers to is that edge between a house and the forest. And this is very typical throughout the eastern half of the country, where a house is put in and it's all exotic plantings and lawn, and it's cut right into the forest. And we need to protect that edge of the woods. So on this diagram, I've showed the yard is on the left. It could also just be, that could be a road. And then on the right is the existing forest that was cut into to put the development in. And it's that forest buffer edge where we really need to protect the existing woods from both the new light that has come in. If it's a new house where they cut right up into the edge of the trees, often you'll have tall, lanky trees with no lower branches because it was forest all around and they cut into it. So you want to make a layered planting with some, it can be some under edge trees, and it's going to depend, is it a south facing side, is it an east facing side, or west facing side, or north facing side, will depend which trees you get. If you're in an area where it's got a lot of invasives in the edge and you've pulled them out, you're going to want to pick some of the more vigorous native ground covers, such as maybe Canada anemone and large-leaf wood aster as the ground cover. And then I might do purple flowering raspberry and yellow bush honeysuckle as the lower shrub later. And then you can do some taller trees, such as, if you need to quickly repair the damage, I would do some birches and shad. And Melanchier is really nice. You also might, if the woods is lacking in diversity, you also might at least put some acorns in there and get some diversity of canopy trees along that edge too. If there's a dip there, then you have the chance of doing more wetland species. That's particularly true on the edge of the road, where there'll be a drainage ditch, and there's lots of great combinations for that. But repairing that edge of the forest is a really important thing for all of us to do, because when all that new light is added in, it really damages if it's got a healthy forest, it really lets in a lot of invasives or just different species, and you lose out in the interior forest, both wildlife and native plants. And then here's a good example of a more, classic long linear hedgerow that could be anywhere. It could be between two farm fields. It could be along the road. You could be on your property connecting up an existing tree with more diverse plantings, lots of different situations. But what I wanted to illustrate with this, so the spiky cluster is that's representing coniferous plants. So it might be thuya, it might be one of the junipers, and then the others are representing more deciduous. But don't plant one of this and one of that. Plant in clusters sometimes. 3, 5 together. Then you can have occasional single ones. If you don't have any existing trees, adding some trees to the hedgerow makes a lot more diverse and interesting wildlife that will come in. And also, even if you're trying to screen a view, it doesn't have to be all evergreen. you can mix some evergreens in with deciduous species to make it more natural and varied looking than the traditional wall of one species that people do, or even a wall of a native species like Thuya, where people just do it as a linear wall. Do more diversity. You'll support a lot more wildlife and species of native plants, and it's very beautiful. The benefits of all this are year round. Right now on the upper left, that's beach plum, one of our great native small trees or shrubs, depending on how you prune it, that thrives in the hottest, driest environment on the edge of paving or in pure sandy or gravelly soil. And it's got these delicious fruits right now that you can eat or you can leave for the birds. We get beautiful fall color with the diversity of species. That's a fragrant sumac on the right there. And then the picture below, you're seeing winterberry holly, which is really stunning all fall and into the winter when it finally gets eaten by birds. Now, I want to show you how I like to have a site prepped for a native hedgerow planting. And that is, I'm really fond of the smothering method where you put down either layers of cardboard, or you can get heavy brown paper and roll it out in rolls and then cover it with mulch. This was a planting we did in Portland in one of the small parks, and they asked for a pollinator garden, and I said no, I wanted to do something that was more long-lived and with woody plants and less maintenance. So they would not let us plant any shrubs. So this is just small trees, so it's red bud and Amelanchier, and they were planted just as small bare root whips. And because it was a city project and it took a long time to get the permission, we weren't able to do the smothering in the fall, which is what I like to do. This is a great time to do it, where you just put down the layers of cardboard with mulch on top. You can use anything for mulch. You can use straw, you can use leaves that are coming down. In this case, we wanted it to look nice, so we used some nice shredded bark mulch. And then because we did this planting in early May, we just planted the trees we were growing from seed, the native ground cover, which was a mixture of whitewood aster, large-leaf wood aster, and Canada anemone. And we planted the tree, so we put down the cardboard, covered it with bark mulch, and then planted the trees right through it. And that was nice because it was a dry summer that we did this, so we only had to go water the trees, individually. And then in the end of mid-September, right around this time of year, we came back in with the plugs that we had grown of the native ground covers. And by then, the cardboard had smothered all the grasses, and we planted right through this. If you're in a really sunny, dry spot, you can also do, the soil solarization, where you put down, say, black plastic, get a good heavy-duty black plastic, and that will kill the existing vegetation. But particularly if you're dealing with existing trees and shrubs that you want to keep, doing the smothering method works really well. Of course, if your site has a lot of invasives, woody invasive species, you've really got to tackle that first. So if it's a site with a lot of invasives, that's your first job, and then you prep the site for planting. Now, the final piece I want to touch on is the issue of genetic diversity in our plants. Whenever possible, get your native plants that are organically grown from seed. And this is my expertise, so I know that this is totally doable. But the modern horticultural industry is centralized. It uses a lot of toxic chemicals. It favors clone plants, and it uses a lot of clever marketing tools that aren't always truthful. So this is yellow bush honeysuckle. This is one of our great native shrubs. It's really easy to grow from seed, produces these yellow flowers, turns into these little capsules that don't ripen until November, and then you just crack them open and it's filled with little teeny dust-like seeds. This is one of our fastest shrubs to grow from seed. This plant has gotten picked up by the nursery industry now, but most of them are cloned. They're either, done from division. They're usually done from divisions, but the problem with that is if we start planting a lot of this out in the landscape and it's all the genes of only one individual we're like weakening the gene pool of that native plant. So whenever possible, sometimes you're not going to have a choice, but make sure you're not getting cultivars and that you're getting the straight species. And this is something that Wild Seed Project is really dedicated to, and we're building our native seed center. It's in Cape Elizabeth, which is near Portland, Maine, and this is where we're growing more of our native seed. It's all organic. And then we also, because we do germination testing on all the seeds that we sell, we end up with a lot of extra plants, and then we have them for sale too. So if you're in the Portland area, please come visit our native seed center. But we all know we are living in a really stressful time, and it requires all of us to act. And planting native plants, and particularly hedgerows, is a really exciting, diverse way that you can create more low maintenance areas in your landscape that are beautiful and will support a lot of wildlife and help connect up your yard to other landscapes across your region. And nobody is too young or too old to do this. We all can do it. So let's create a different trajectory for the future. And I know people have a lot of questions, so I'm going to turn it over to Sarah now.
Thank you so much, Heather. That was an inspiring talk for me personally, so I really appreciate it. So yeah, let's answer a few of the many great questions that we received from our registrants today. So the first question is from Mary S. How can hedgerows be developed on small lots?
Well, I hope I gave you a few examples there, but don't get hung up on the size of your property. Everything that you do makes a difference. In fact, I've been working the field of native plant conservation and horticulture for the last 40 years. And what's amazing is you just add, start in a small spot and add some, a couple of shrubs or a small tree and the herbaceous layer, you quickly start attracting the wildlife to it. So look around your yard, and this is a great time of year for people to be doing this because you do the smothering method this fall, and that doesn't require any heavy digging. So anyone can do that. It's really not hard to put down the cardboard or heavy brown paper and cover it with mulch. And then you've got the fall and winter to decide what you're going to plant there. And so it can be a little corner by the doorway, and then the next year you might do the other side of your front house, or think about where you can make a separation between the street and your front yard. Like, I don't know why in the United States people feel like they're supposed to leave their yard open to the public, and I'm really for creating you can make it a low fence that makes a nice edge, and then you can do whatever you want behind it and still look neat on the street. So just don't be afraid, just start doing it.
I like the turn of phrase, neat on the street. I think that has a nice ring to it. So we had a few questions like this. Rebecca asks if you can offer advice for homeowners that are living in neighborhoods and want to incorporate aspects of hedgerow into their landscaping without offending neighbors.
Well, again, that's where tidy edges. So either doing fence first, or you know, if you can also do a wire fence, and then grow native vines on it, and that makes a nice separation of the space that's very two-dimensional, and then you can do the rest of your garden behind it. There's a blog on the Wild Seed Project website that I wrote on native vines, so you can read more about some that I recommend for that. But you know, also having nice edging, you know, you can sink rustic logs or, you know, dimension lumber to make a nice tidy edge to your neighbor so your stuff doesn't creep into them. You can, yeah, like I said, fences, I think fences make good neighbors, and it doesn't have to be solid. It can be an open lattice fence so little animals can go through it, but it will keep you or dogs or children from running back and forth.
Great resources. Thank you. You touched on this a little bit in your presentation, but if you'd like to expand a little bit more on the role of keystone plants within your hedgerows.
Mm-hmm. So your audience probably knows what keystone plants, but those are just the ones that support more biodiversity than other species. So of course, you always want to make sure you include some of them, but that doesn't mean you leave out all, you know, another native species that doesn't support as many other species of wildlife. And we probably don't know, you know, that data is especially for the, you know, insect population, but there's a lot of other stuff going on with all of our native plants that we don't know about. But yes, always make sure, you know, every yard should have some oak in it. And if you don't have any oak, you know, add some, and that's as simple as planting an acorn right now. There's lots of different species of native oaks. There's even small ones like the bare oak tree, which only gets about 6 or 8 feet tall. It's kind of shrubby, but you can prune it up to look like a little tree, or the post oak is a smaller one. So everyone should be adding oaks to their yard, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't be adding other species too. And again, that's one of the things we put in our guide, the different, you know, wildlife it supports and which are the keystone species. But you don't only need to include them. What you need to include is lots of species and multiples of each species. You know, especially make sure you have at least 2 individuals. That way they can have healthy cross-pollination and produce seed. If you only have one individual, you know, and there's not another one around, then that plant won't produce viable seed often.
And this is our last question, and it is from Birdie. She asked, do hedgerows harbor sneaky invasives, and what can you do to curb the infiltration of unwanted species?
Well, first of all, prepare your site well. So if you started with a site with a lot of invasives, you know the ones that were there and you've learned what they look like, so you're going to keep your eye on it. And you know, it is like getting out in the landscape and peeking what's there. So, you know, we unfortunately, modern humans have been playing God with the world's flora and fauna and bringing things in from around the world. So, you know, you can't do nothing. You have to just be observant and pull them out when they're young. But if you prepared the site well, you'll have much less of it. And if you've planted densely, you know, the layers of vegetation. On the Wild Seed Project website, we have a PDF you can download called Invasives to Natives. And we made a list of the more vigorous native species that are good to plant. If you had a site that had a lot of invasives, then, you know, you're not going to want to do some little delicate herbaceous plant that can't compete if you've got a lot of other things. But it's being observant and listing children to help pull them out, because they have a great time with that.
Wow, what a great presentation, and thank you so much for taking the time to answer these questions from our members and registrants. As we wrap up today, thank you again, Heather, and I just want everybody to keep an eye on the Wildlands website for more great events like tonight. So we hope that everyone has a wonderful afternoon and enjoyed the Wild Ones webinar, The Beauty and Benefits of Hedgerows with Heather. McCargo from the Wild Seed Project. So we extend our gratitude to our speaker and we wish everyone the best.